School of Social Work's brand new Applied Arts and Social Justice Certificate Program. So tonight is one of a series of events in which we in the social work program are experimenting with using arts to change the world. So first, I just would like to thank our co-sponsors for this event this evening. We have Portland's own Telling Room, who were one of our co-sponsors, Heather Davis and, excuse me, I'm sorry. Hello? Hello? Oh, Mom, this is not a good time. Yeah, I know, I'm going to tell them. I'm going to tell them. Okay, Mom. You too, thank you. Okay, bye. My mother asks if you would please all turn your cell phones off right now. Thanks. So Portland's Telling Room is one of our co-sponsors. Thank you to Heather Davis and Abigail Chance for your participation in getting this evening together. Also, UNE's own Office of Multicultural Affairs and Diversity. Thank you, Donna Gasper-Jarvis, for your assistance with this event. Kat Gifford for promotional materials. She's from the School of Social Work. And all of the Applied Arts and Social Justice Certificate students for various tasks that it takes for a program like this to run. Could you guys just stand up for a moment? Those of you who are Applied Arts and Social Justice students. These are pioneers. And now it's my privilege to introduce our two co-hosts for tonight's event. We have Dr. Danielle Wozniak, who is the Director and Associate Professor of Social Work here at UNE and storyteller and Energizer Bunny extraordinaire. And Dr. Michael Sargent, Associate Professor of Psychology at Bates College and founder of The Corner storytelling venue in Lewiston, Maine. Over to our co-hosts. Thank you very much for being here.
Hello, everybody.
Hello?
Can you hear us?
A little quiet.
All right. So,
Better? Hello?
better? Hello? So I want to welcome you all to this event tonight. Thank you so much for coming. I'd like to begin with a rousing thank you to Dr. Lori Power for doing all the things that made this event possible. Lori, this event happened when Natasha Wilson and I believe some other students came to me and raised the issue of microaggressions in the classroom, in the practice world, and in the social world, and said that it was an important concern, and that they often didn't know how to respond, how to handle it, or what to say. I took that to the School of Social Work faculty and brought it up with them. And what I learned was that faculty also said, sometimes we don't know what to say either. And so we began to hold hands, join forces, and begin to look at this issue together. The Microaggressions Committee was formed, and they met with Lori and myself throughout the summer, talking about how do we bring this issue to light? How do we educate? What do we say? What do we do? And how do we create change? I'd like the Microaggressions Committee, the founders of that committee, to stand and be recognized. I thank you for your dedication, for coming to UNE all summer long when no one else was here, but Lori and me and everyone else, and for talking with us about this. This is a first in a long series that we hope to have of educational events, fun events, and awareness raising, so that we can journey together to understand what microaggressions are and how we can be change agents. We named it the mosquito in the room because, like a mosquito, microaggressions are those things you can't always get your hand on, but they leave a mark. So, tonight, you will hear a number of stories about with microaggressions. We coached our storytellers, and now I'd like to coach our listeners. We can't always be articulate when we really need to be. So our storytellers will do their best, and we'd ask you to join with us in support and grace, and join with us in transformation as we take on this tough topic together.
Hello, in the back of the room. Wave, you can hear me? Wave, okay, excellent, thank you. So my name is Michael Sargent, and I'm a faculty member at Bates College, as Lori mentioned. I want to thank all of you here for welcoming me. I can tell that this is a really warm and supportive and friendly community, and I'm delighted to be a part of it for this evening. And I'm really excited that we're doing this based on stories. As Lori mentioned, I have founded a storytelling event called The Corner, held in Lewiston, in downtown, at a restaurant called She Doesn't Like Guthrie's, on the second Thursday of every month. We have 10 stories, all on a common theme. It's inspired by The Moth, which you may be familiar with, and also Snap Judgment, one of my favorite storytelling programs. Tonight, we're going to bring some of that spirit of exciting, interesting, fun storytelling right here, and for a really important cause, energizing our thought, focusing our thought on microaggressions. So you're going to hear stories where people describe being on the receiving end of a microaggression, but also stories in which one realizes that one was on the other end of a microaggression and what one learned from that. It is my job at this moment to tell you a little bit about how this is going to work. So as you probably noticed in the program, we've got tellers before the intermission and tellers after the intermission. Each teller has 5 to 7 minutes, and they've been told that. And tellers, when you come on stage, if you look down, you will see an iPad with a timer on it that will count down from 7 to 0. So you can check that at any point just to see how you're doing on time. And trust me, if you haven't told stories before, I can assure you the clock often goes faster than you think. So keep an eye on it every once in a while. And then when you're running a little bit close to the end, you may notice Danielle or I standing up to signal that you're almost out of time. We do have to keep you under that 7-minute limit so that we're going to be able to end the event on time. Also, audience members, after every story ends, we're going to invite you to take about 30 seconds or so to jot down any reactions you have, any questions you have for a given storyteller. Often one of the really powerful things about stories is when we hear someone else's story, we may realize that there are similarities between their experience and our own that are really important in building community and building relationships. And so that might be another kind of reaction, is to relate in brief how your story intersects with the story that you just heard. To keep things moving along, we're not going to actually have the audience speak after each teller, but jot down your thoughts, because at the end of each half, so just before the intermission and just before the end of the night, we will then invite comments and questions from the audience. So we'll give you some time to jot down thoughts right after each other, and then we will actually talk amongst ourselves, or as a group at the end. And this is really important. This is the #1 rule for all you tellers, so listen closely. This is of critical importance. When you tell your story, have fun. It may be hard subject matter, but really relax and try to enjoy the experience of telling as much as it can be enjoyed. And welcome, come on in. Hi there. My name's Michael, nice to meet you.
We've been waiting for you.
I want to quickly check to see where all my tellers are. Is there a Danielle Wozniak somewhere in the house? Danielle? Oh, I just forgot to skip her, so. Oh, there you are. Okay, so Danielle will be our first teller. Mel Hugh, where are you? Mel? There's Mel. Hi there. Henry Moser. Okay. Kelly Fox. Hi there. And Arabella Perez. Hi there. Okay, so that's the order. We will remind you when you are on deck, so when you are next. And in that spirit, I will point out that Mel Hugh, you are, well, where's Mel again? There you are. You are on deck. And our first teller right now is going to be Danielle Wozniak. Please give Danielle a warm round of applause.
who know me know I rarely sit. Okay. Yeah. I was raised in Oxford, Ohio. Oxford, Ohio had the distinction of being a stop on the Underground Railroad prior to the Civil War. We knew this not because we'd read it in our history books called Pilgrim's Progress, books that romanticized colonialism, but because our houses had hidden rooms, had panels in the walls, and some of the houses actually had passageways that connected one to the other. I was very proud of my town. I was raised in Oxford, Ohio, the town that launched the Freedom Riders, the town that trained young men and women to come and hear that their bodies could be bloodied and maybe killed, but through passive resistance, they would help integrate the South. I was proud of my town. I went to college at Miami University in my town. I sat in the same seats for Choral Union that the Freedom Riders had sat in. I also went to college there at 17. Because I was so young, my parents asked me if I would live at home for the first year. That was fine. One afternoon, late on Friday, I was walking home from classes. I was walking down those wide, tree-lined boulevards that made our college campus one of the most beautiful in Ohio. And I was just marveling at how quiet and deserted and beautiful my campus was. I became aware of some boys in back of me, loud and boisterous boys. I tried at first to ignore them, but they got closer and they got louder. I looked quickly around to see them, and I saw that they had fraternity jackets on with big Greek letters on them, and they were full of each other and full of themselves, and they were vulgar. And I noticed that they were calling things to a boy who was walking in front of me. I hadn't even noticed that he was there until I heard them call. And they called words like fag and queer and home. And they thought it was really funny. At 17, I wanted to turn around and say, "Shut up, you assholes!" or "Get off my campus!" But my parents had taught me very early how men with power could silence women, and I was afraid. And so I walked home in silence. And so did the boy in front of me. And eventually the fraternity boys turned off and went to their frat house. When I got home, I told my father about the event. He was furious, and he said, "Remember what those Greek letters are. I'm calling the dean of students." But I wasn't telling him so he would call someone. I was telling him about my failure, about my shame. I knew at that moment that silence was the voice of complicity, and I had been complicit in that aggression. So here's my moment of transformation. I never, ever wanted to be complicit again. And every day since that moment, I have made sure that I do use my voice and that I'm never silent. The legacy of my town was handed to me because I lived there, but I had to earn the right to claim it as mine.
Okay, so Henry Moser, you're on deck. Please join me in welcoming our next storyteller, Mel Hugh.
Hi, I'm Mel. I just want to say I've never done this before, so please bear with me. I'm from Ivory Coast, which is in West Africa. I was born there, but around 3, my parents immigrated to North Carolina, so technically I'm from the South. If you haven't been to North Carolina, it's a pretty big melting pot. Like, you walk down the street, you see an Asian person, an African American, Native American. There's just everything there. So when I decided to move up north, I was in for like the biggest culture shock of my life. I got in the taxi and I looked around and said, "Oh my God, this is different." When I got to school, my mom dropped me off. And she got in the cab, and I can't tell you how much I cried that day. I bawled my eyes out. There was no consoling me. I called her and I said I couldn't do it because I had this overwhelming fear of being the only black woman in a sea full of white people. I don't know where it came from. It just hit me then and there. So I decided, okay, well, I'm here for an education. I'm not here for friends, so I can do this. But I did make a friend. I made a friend. She was Nigerian, and her name was Jindu. Now, before I met Jindu, I was warned that she was aggressive and that she was loud and she had a whole lot of attitude, and all she did was want to fight the world. I met Jin, and she couldn't have been the sweetest person. Granted, she did have a lot of attitude. She was known for the hand clapping, the neck rolling, the you ain't gonna do that. That was Jin. And I was just like, I admire you. Because when Jen spoke, she had so much fire and so much passion. Everyone grabbed a seat and sat down and just listened to her talk. And I was just like, I want to be that. I don't understand why everybody thinks she's so mad. I don't understand why everybody thinks she has such a bad attitude. Until I watched everybody's face when Jen spoke. It was eye rolls, it was hand clapping, it was something they expected. So I was like, okay. It wasn't until me and Jen went to a party. We went to a party and we were the only two African American girls there. And I remember we went in, we had a great time, everybody's partying, everybody's laughing. I go downstairs, Jen is upstairs. I can hear Jen screaming all the way downstairs. I rush up and all I see is her wailing, 3 guys holding her back, and a circle of white people just watching as she's yelling at this one guy for God knows what. But in that moment, I was just like, Jen, do not be the statistic. They already expect you to be the angry black woman. Do not feed into their stereotype. But that's exactly what she did. I tried to calm her down. I was like, Jen, it's gonna be okay. But I couldn't. Until I realized why they were yelling at her. Apparently, he had dropped the N-word concerning her attitude that day. And what shocked me was that everybody was watching as if she was an animal, as if she needed to be tamed, but nobody fought for Jen. And something snapped. Everybody pulled her aside, and though I didn't yell as loud as Jen did, I made sure to make it a point to say, that's not okay. Because I knew in that moment, even though I was scared to death of being the angry black woman, if I didn't say something for Jen, her anger would have been irrelevant. Everything she was crying over and everything she was freaking out over would have been irrelevant. And that's not fair. You threw a blatant racial slur at someone and they're supposed to take it because you expect them to act this way? That wasn't fair. Everything died down that day. And I questioned what to do. It wasn't until I had a discussion with one of my friends, a guy from Wisconsin, a med student. He was smart, he was funny, he has everything going. He's the leader of this nation. And he was my friend. And we were doing homework, and he says to me, as we're doing homework, we got on the topic of racism and all that, and he says to me, God, Mel, you are lucky. And I was just like, whoa, why am I lucky? He was just like, because your mom's an immigrant and she made it through so much adversity, you are lucky to be here. And I was like, you know what, you're right, I am lucky. You are absolutely right. But he held my gaze and looked at me. He was just like, you are really lucky. And I was just like, why am I lucky? He was just like, because if you were the typical African American woman who came in here, you wouldn't have as many friends as you do. And I was like, what is that supposed to mean? And he was just like, I fit that mold. I fit the white girl mold. I had straight hair, I dressed nicely. If I came in ghetto with my hair patted down and with an attitude, I would not have friends at this school. So who am I? Am I white when I am respectable? Or if I'm angry, am I just the angry black woman? I have nothing. He stripped me of my identity that day and put me into this little confined box. And all I could remember is my mother is an immigrant. She came here not knowing any English, not knowing any person, and she survived. But the way she survived was the most impressive thing I've ever seen. Because she was who she was 100% of the time. Not once did she disown her identity. Not once did she pretend she was something she wasn't. She was grateful and she was blessed. And she never spoke of anger. Microaggression, she felt like didn't come from hate. It just came from ignorance. So she looked at me and said, "You are not American. You are you. And you need to realize that." You need to realize that it's better for you to be who you are and teach them something they don't know than to conform into what they do know.
Henry Mosher, you're up, and Kelly Fox, you're on deck. I'd like to introduce Henry Mosher.
Okay, so this is a topic it's hard to talk about. It's hard to listen to. Racism, macro, micro, it's torn this country apart. It's tearing it apart now. It's most likely going to continue in the future. So give me a second to talk about something we're all comfortable with for just 1 second. And it's grandparent sex. Well, I gotta explain why I'm here, okay, why I'm sitting here. Is sometime in the 50s, my French grandmother in France had sex with a white guy, had my mom. She dropped him. A couple years later, she met African-American GI on a base in France. They got married, had 2 kids, one kind of white, one kind of black, and there were the 3 of them, and they moved around in the bases in Europe, Germany, England, stuff like that. And as time passed, they moved to the States. They got stationed in Illinois, Scott Air Force Base. And in all this time, believe it or not, my mom had me. So I mean, it's like young people having young people, and I was really young. My mom was young. So here I come, I'm in the picture, and my grandparents have another son, who's my uncle. We're basically the same age. And we lived in East St. Louis. There was base housing in Illinois, but I mean, ironically, I don't even know if that's the word, but I mean, black people could go die, white people could go die, but the Air Force did not want interracial couples living together on base, so we lived in this town called East St. Louis. It's a city, and again, why I'm talking about them is because my mom kind of did her own thing a couple of different times, so these were my primary caregivers, two different extended periods of my life. And we lived in East St. Louis, and this place was insane. Predominantly African American, the stuff you see on TV, the stuff you see in the movies. There was a bridge that went across the big old Mississippi to St. Louis where all the rich white people lived. They literally blocked this bridge on Friday and Saturday nights because they didn't want the East St. Louisers coming in. Anyway, I lived there, and I'll tell you some stories that happened there in a second, but then the family moved. I went here, they went there, and then we all ended up in Southern Cal. And we ended up on base in Southern Cal, so I guess they were into interracial couples in Southern Cal at the time. But the things that I want to talk about with these weird experiences I had with my grandfather, when it was he and I, and my uncle, who was the same age as me. We, best friends, best family, we were it. Whenever we were out in public, though, it was weird. The quick story, I got 2 quick ones. The first one was, like soccer practice, just something like this. Soccer practice, I get picked up, practice is over, my grandfather's standing on the side, and I'm done, the coach comes up to me, ruffles my hair, says, hey, nice job, Henry, we'll see you next week, but it looks like you don't have a ride, so I'll wait for a few minutes. Oh, no, I got a ride, it's my grandpa. And then the pause. And then he starts looking back and forth, and he keeps looking back and forth, and he's pretending like he's not looking back and forth as he's looking back and forth, and he's just like, oh, okay, I'll see you next week. Doesn't even introduce himself to my grandfather, nothing like that, just goes ahead. And things like that were common, and it was sad that we got 3 minutes. Okay, so here we go. I remember at parent-teacher conference, I was probably 11 or 12, and my grandfather was there with me at this weird, those parent-teacher conferences, 3:25, it was my turn. And he opened the door, and there's the teacher in the front, and here's me, this scrawny little white kid, and then my grandpa's huge black dude, and we walk in, and the teacher drops papers on the ground, and again, she tries to cool it all off and act like it's nothing, and oh, hi, and the pause. Who do we have here, Henry? It's my grandpa, he's here, okay. Not asking him who he is, asking me who he is. And again, so what happened with this was, I hated being around him and my uncle. I mean, we were best buddies at home, but I hated being with them outside. I didn't want to be different. Why was everyone staring at me? My buddies all had something to say. Everyone wanted to know what was going on. And what it did, I resented my grandfather. I resented the fact that he was black. I resented the fact that we had to go places and people were staring at us. And Lori asked me, I need a story with the beginning, a story with the middle, a story with an end. And there's no real end to this story, except I just called my grandfather today. Told him I was doing this. He's still alive. He's pulling oranges off the trees in Southern Cal. And I said, hey, this is what I'm doing. And I know, Grandpa, we never talked about this. But what do you think? Because here's what happened. I disowned him. I was so embarrassed. It was, Grandpa, just drop me off here. Pick me up over there. Notes came home from school, parent night, or group activities at the school, those things, straight in the trash. I didn't want anything to do with us as a group. So I called him up today. This is what we're doing. I told him I need an end, and I'm like, how did that make you feel? Oh, Henry, you gotta understand. Here I was. I had a white daughter, 3 kind of black, kind of white sons, a white wife with a big mouth. My life was hard, and I was an alcoholic. He didn't say that part, I threw that in. He says this, and I'm like, so how did that make you feel? He's like, oh, it was nothing. You were just reacting to external pressures. People were making you act a certain way, and I listened to the speaker before me, and she was talking about how, she remained loyal to who she was. I didn't. I was embarrassed, I was ashamed, I wanted nothing to do with it. And I'm, Grandpa, how did that make you feel? I don't care, Henry, it was no big deal. You were just doing what you thought was right. You were embarrassed, and just to sum it up, he really didn't care, and I felt kind of cool about that. So that is my ending.
So there was a lot in that story, and as you prepare to jot your reactions down, one thing that just jumped out at me was whenever we are finding ourselves interacting with someone's parent or grandparent, and the child or the grandchild is there, and we're directing our reaction to the parent or that grandparent, the kid's watching, the kid's listening, the kid notices, and the kids often remember. But enough of my reaction. Take about 30 seconds again, take a couple of beats, jot down your reaction, your questions, your comments to Henry's story. Please. Okay. So, Arabella, you're on deck. Please join me in welcoming our next storyteller, Kelly.
So I have never done this either. I've done a lot of teaching and training, but I've never done this. So here's my story. I grew up in a very racially diverse neighborhood, an area in New Jersey, and I went to a very large integrated university with lots of different kinds of people. And after I graduated, a couple of years after that, I moved to Maine. And when I moved to Maine, I looked around and went, what have they done with everyone else? Because it was everybody who looked like me. So I went to graduate school here, and fast forward, and I met my partner, who we've been together for the last 15 years. And we were two white, middle-aged lesbian women living in the woods in Maine, and we decided that we wanted to have a family. So we adopted a young boy, a baby from Nepal. And we went to Nepal and we met this teeny little beautiful baby with brown, beautiful skin and beautiful brown eyes. And we just were enamored and in love with this baby. And when we were leaving Nepal with our beautiful little baby boy, the orphanage director said to us as we were getting ready to leave, don't worry, his skin will lighten when you get home when he doesn't have as much sunlight. And I was a bit stunned because I thought everybody pretty much would not have that kind of reaction in a country where people had darker colored skin and lighter colored skin, and there was many different kinds of races of Nepali people. When I was talking to my partner about this, she said she thought it was really sad that that was their reaction. So I come home with my beautiful little baby boy, and we take our very first trip to Toys R Us. Tiny little baby in a basket. And because we want our child to have all sorts of kinds of toys, I decided I wanted to buy him a baby doll. So we're walking through Toys R Us. Do you know how hard it is to find a baby doll of color in Toys R Us in South Portland, Maine? It's really hard. However, I see this beautiful baby doll that happens to look just like my son. And I pick up this beautiful doll and I hand him to my baby, and my baby says, big baby, because the baby is really actually quite as big as my son. And so we bring this beautiful baby home, and the two of them start sleeping together in the crib, and they're just wonderful together. So we decide to bring home another child. So we go back to Nepal, and we are adopting a baby girl, a little girl who's 3. So before I go to Nepal to bring home and finish the adoption of my daughter, I go back to Toys R Us thinking maybe I'll find another baby doll that I can bring with me to meet my daughter. So I go back to Toys R Us, not a single doll of color. So I leave Toys R Us, and I think to myself, well, I'm going to go to Nepal. When I'm in Nepal, I will buy her a baby doll. I go to a department store with my little baby strapped to me, and it's a little department store, and I wander around the department store, not a single dark baby doll. All of the dolls are little white dolls with blonde hair and blue eyes and pinkish skin. It was appalling and sad, very sad. So fast forward, my little boy comes home from a little private school that he goes to and says to my partner, why am I the only child with brown skin in the school? And my partner said, you know, I don't know, but we love the color of your skin, and it's so beautiful, and I wish my skin were that color. In the same little school, private school, where we are the only lesbian couple with small children of color, I am asked to be on the diversity committee. Surprise, surprise. And on the diversity committee, we start to have this conversation about how we can introduce into the curriculum ideas about race and ethnicity and sexual orientation and things like that. And I give some ideas. Well, about 3 days later, we get this letter by email from a woman who's at the school talking about how we should not look at race, we should not think about those things, that we really want to just be inclusive of everybody and be accepting and teach tolerance. And in my mind, what I thought was something that someone said to me when I was in college, which is that colorblindness is not the same as understanding someone else's experience of being different, of being not white and not being privileged. So my real dilemma, our real dilemma, is when our children are not with us, nobody's going to see our children as white. They're going to see our children as children of color out in the world. And our dilemma is, so thinking about things like what happened to Michael Brown, do we teach our child to be happy and glad and proud of who they are and what the color of their skin is and what their racial identity is? Or do we teach them to be afraid and to be quiet and to not even make a sound or to make any kind of argument with someone who might shoot them, like a police officer? That's my story.
I would like to reintroduce to you Arabella Perez.
So, hello, hola. The name of my story is Ouch. So, I am Arabella Perez, the daughter of Armando Perez Monzon and Mali Hernandez Martinez. So I'm going to start with them and then sort of take you up to 1988. So my father is Cuban. He came here with the first wave of Cubans that fled Fidel Castro. It's important that I share that with you because those Cubans that came in that particular period are a very proud set of Cubans who were landowners, who were wealthy, who were well educated, who were essentially the ruling class. And that's my father's story. He came here and he left his entire family behind. He came here with $5 in his pocket. My mother is Afro-Puerto Rican. She lived in Puerto Rico up until she was 15, and then came to Newark, New Jersey, where she met my father. They fell in love, they married, and they had 2 daughters, and I'm the oldest one. Growing up, my mother would say to me, don't tell people that you're Puerto Rican. Don't tell people that you're Puerto Rican. Tell them that you're Cubana. Because to be Cuban is to be white, is to be smart, is to have fled communism, which is socially acceptable. Don't tell people that you're Afro-Puerto Rican. Because to be Puerto Rican is to be uncouth, classless, not educated, loud. So my mother's self-loathing of herself was passed on to me. So here I am at a university in DC. It's my junior year. I'm an English major because I love to read and I love literature. And I was fascinated with Southern literature in particular and with poetry as well. Besides taking English classes, I happened to have 2 roommates at the time who were social work majors, and it convinced me to take a particular class that was a service learning class. So I took that and I actually really enjoyed it. So it being my junior year, I had to meet with an advisor to talk about my future. Now in my mind, my future was, I'm an English major, I want to write, I want to teach, I want to get my master's and my doctorate. I had it all planned out. So I sit down with this advisor that I don't really recall having met before. And she was a nice enough lady. And I sat there with her, and she looked over my transcript. And she noticed that I had taken a social work class. So So in the course of talking, she asked me my background, and I shared with her who I was. That I was Cuban, and I was Puerto Rican. I violated my mother's rule. And after I shared that with her, and she looked over my transcript and talked about, what's your future? What do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to be a professor of literature. I love this stuff. And she looked at me, and she's like, wouldn't you rather help your people? Up until that point, I didn't know that I had people. All of a sudden, I had people, and I was supposed to help them. So here I am, all of 20 years old. Ronald Reagan's in office, just to help set the context for you. And I looked at her, and I started to get red and hot in my face. And she kept talking, and I don't know what she said, but tears started pouring forth. She looked at me, and she was like, I'm so sorry if I said something. And what do you think I did? I said, it's okay, you're probably right. I just shut it down. I had broken my mother's rule. I had shared too much about my ethnic background, and now it was somehow being held against me. But at that point in time, I didn't know that. All I knew was that deep down, it triggered something in me. And I felt very ashamed sitting there. I felt unworthy. All of those fears that I had, that I wasn't worthy enough to be here, I wasn't worthy enough to study English literature, all of a sudden just came tumbling out of me, and I sat there crying. And then she proceeded to talk about research, which I'm not quite sure if this even exists, but she said, well, you know, you are bilingual, and studies show that people whose first language is not English don't do as well in English. And I'm like, really? What a surprise. But did I say that to her? No. Instead, I just thought, she has power. She's a professor sitting across the desk from me, and who am I to question her? So I left, and as you can imagine, whenever you have an interaction like that, you think about all the zingers, all the comebacks. None of them were there for me. So now here I sit, and not only am I a social worker, but I'm the executive director of an agency. I teach on trauma. I teach on cultural competency. I teach on microaggressions. I essentially did all those things that she kind of told me to do. And yes, I struggle with that. I sit here and I think, what if? What if I decided to be that professor of English? I happen to have met, shortly thereafter, the one and only, I believe, professor on campus who was of color, who was the diversity director. I didn't know there was a diversity director, and he called me into his office because he heard me speak somewhere. And he said, what's your future? Your future's promising. And I shared with him what had happened. And he just looked at me, and he shook his head. And knowing that I was an English major, he looked at me and he said, you know, Emily Dickinson's one of my favorite poets. I'm like, really? He's like, yes. And I love that line, I dwell in possibilities. And I want you to dwell in possibilities. And that was a gift that I needed at that point in time. So why is my story called Ouch? So when I do trainings, one of the things that I talk about is when you have a moment like that, one of the things that you can do that I would empower my 20-year-old self to have done back then was to have simply looked at her and said, ouch. And if I had said, ouch, I wonder what sort of conversation she and I would have had. I suspect that it may have been a more meaningful conversation because I would have been able to put down my wall, and in turn she could have put down hers. Really because I said, ouch. And I welcomed an opportunity to also hear what she had to say, and that she in turn could see me for who I was. So, I leave you with that one word, ouch.
So what particularly stood out for me with Arabella's story was that she felt unworthy for something that she couldn't change. And I think that's a very different feeling than feeling shame about maybe a behavior or something that you've done, but not something that is you.
Great, thank you.
Other thoughts? And the stories resonate with folks because you saw something similar there, something that you experienced. Thank you.
Kelly's story really resonated with me. My best friend growing up was adopted from the Philippines, and she definitely identifies as a little white girl from Maine. and now works in inner city Boston. And people always say, "Oh, you're a color," like, and they always say, "What are you?" with this gesture. And she's like, "I'm a little white girl from Maine." So that just really resonated with me because as her little white friend from Maine, I never really know how to support her in that. And it's something that I constantly struggle with and trying to be supportive, but not understanding fully.
Excellent, thank you. It is hard, isn't it? Yeah. Other comments, observations? Yes, ma'am.
So I want to really acknowledge, first of all, the stories, thank you, but I really want to acknowledge your story, Danielle, because I think sometimes when we notice those little moments, maybe it's not even directed at us or around us, but we notice it, we don't speak up because we fear that that aggression or those comments will then be directed towards us in a different way, in a different kind of aggression. And that matters because it's so easy for us to excuse it and say, oh, this is, he walked home, he's gonna have his own day, it'll be fine. But at the end of the day, if we don't speak up, we're then acknowledging the fact that we're asking someone else to ignore something that we don't want to endure. So that it just kind of brought me around to that.
Thank you.
That's good. In much that's, oh, is there a hand?
Sorry, I didn't see it.
Oh,
Natasha.
you go. I think Henry's story really resonated with me as a woman who's raising two children who are, just hate the word biracial. It just reinforces like the archaic racist construct. But I noticed like the difference between when my partner or I will go pick the children up from school or from soccer practice and parents won't talk to me or and I wonder like, will my children resent me? Will they not want me around? And my heart was just breaking as I listened to that.
Thank you.
I really appreciated that in both Mel and Henry's stories, there was a description of family members who seem really unapologetic about who they are, and that made me think about like what does it take for someone to get to that point, that place of feeling like of being unapologetic, of being like proud of who they are, and that's something that I know a lot of parents try to impart on their children through books and quotes and stuff like that, but obviously there's all this other stuff going on in the world too, and in society, magazines, and school, and so that made me think about like just how, like what does it take to be able to be that real, that authentic.
Thank you. Thank you. Boy, listening to your comments really makes me know that calling it the Mosquito was the right thing to do, that these are piercing jabs and wounds that are small, but they're fast and they're hard. Maybe one or two more comments? One other comment?
They told me he'll lay down too. And that was in Atlanta, Georgia. They told Shelly that he would lay down. And he did, he died in Colorado. But what I can say is that when we were in Atlanta, my partner went in the room, tried to get into the room when he was born. And the woman who was there, I don't know her, she was from Africa, I know that, she had the whole full dress. And so when she went into the room to give birth to the baby, with the birth mother said, wait, Shelly's supposed to come in and see this baby being born. Why would you want that Daki-looking lesbian to come in and watch this baby being born? So I get it from all sides.
That's a real tough one. Thank you so much. Wow.
So, obviously these stories bring up a lot for us, and we'd love to take more comments, but we're already running a little bit behind schedule, so why don't we take an intermission? The program indicates that it will be a 15-minute intermission. To catch up a little bit, let's cut it down a little bit, maybe more like 10 minutes, I'd suggest. We'll give you an opportunity to take a bathroom break, have some coffee or other beverages, and also just commune with one another. So let's resume in about 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, as I said, we're running a little bit behind on time. If we weren't running behind on time, I would put a shameless plug in for next Thursday's installment of The Corner, 7 p.m., 115 Middle Street, Lewiston. The theme is Fearless. Among our tellers will be Tara Clancy, who's actually a mock Grand Slam champion from New York, who's going to fly up and tell. But we're running behind, so I won't do that. Instead, I will simply point out that Anik is on deck, and right now is Clay. Please welcome Clay.
Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to be here. I'm going to take, my story is fairly short, so I'm going to take the first minute or two just to take you back for a second. I'm so thrilled that this certificate in Applied Arts and Social Justice has been founded recently. About a dozen years ago, we started a project called the Center for the Arts and Social Transformation, where we were inviting people in to read plays, to do concerts, poetry, doing a variety of activities and using this space. And I just want to take you back to an event one of the events that changed my life. I wrote a play called Shadow Souls. It was about 5 women who spent a night in a women's shelter, and during the course of the night they find that the shelter is going to be closed. It's based on a real event that happened at the Y here in Portland around that time. And I had friends who worked there, social work friends who worked there. But imagine, if you would, this space that you're sitting in right now. All these chairs are gone, they're all on the side, and instead there's a circle of trees in this space. And just a couple of objects, which actually, it's interesting, all of those trees, just before tonight, I went downstairs, they're all down in the basement still. The set was designed so that you sat on the outside and watched the action in the round. It was remarkable, and it's magic. It's what we do, what the arts do, is they create magic and they transform lives. So I'm so excited that this is the beginning of something really new and profound and very meaningful, certainly to me, because of my own history with it. I want to share, my name is Clay Graybill. I started out here as a faculty member in the School of Social Work, and 20 years ago we really undertook to transform the curriculum. And we revised the human behavior and the social environment sequence to focus in much more specifically on all the isms. And as someone instructing that, you think of yourself as an enlightened individual, and I know, and I get it, and I'm not prejudiced, and all that. And as I started to read things, and particularly I remember Peggy McIntosh's article on unpacking the knapsack of white privilege. It's really kind of interesting, when you're tall, when you're male, when you're in the society we live in, when you're heterosexual, when you're, go down the list, and from an upper middle class family, at every single privilege conceivable. And one of the things about privilege is you don't need to think about it. It's the other people. It's the people without it who have to fight it all the time. And so, but through those readings, I thought, okay, I'm getting it. I understand what this is about. And so, the other part of this that's relevant to the story is, okay, so I'm this, we're in an intellectual enterprise during the day. I'm a weekend warrior, and by that I mean I'm a person who likes to build things, move dirt around, plant stuff, and so on. I'm always out there working on things. So I needed some clamps, these long clamps, and there are things that you can do. You can screw on a piece of pipe, so you make a real pipe clamp, and you can make a real long one. And somebody told me you need black pipe for that if you want it long, because if you do the galvanized pipe, it'll mark up the wood and so on. So I thought, okay, that's cool. So I went to the hardware store, and here's where it gets interesting. So I walked in, right, and behind the counter, there's this young woman, kind of petite young woman. Again, I'm tall, I'm the guy. I walk in, and I looked looked at her and I looked past her to see the guy. I looked for the guy that I could ask for the black pipe. And you know, it was interesting. I was saying to Danielle before, I think I caught myself in time before it was too obvious. I hope I did. And I went, whoa, I've been reading about all of this stuff, and here it is right in my face, a tiny little example of the thing that happens every single day, all day long. I was looking for the guy to talk to. I had a total assumption. So I refocused my gaze, I looked back at her and said, I need 2 pieces of 6-foot-long black pipe. She goes, aisle 7, halfway down. I thought, okay, I get it. And when I was asked about to tell a story, that was the first thing that popped in my mind because I realized it's one of those tiny microaggressions that we commit all day, every day with our assumptions. And ever since then, what I've tried to do is when I find myself with that instinct is just pause for a second. Don't assume that this person does or doesn't know something, but ask. And that's my story.
You would just take a moment to jot down your ideas and reactions. Next up, our storyteller, Anik Umutonowasi.
Hi, my name is Anik, and I'm from Rwanda, and here's my story. When I first came in Maine, I thought that there was anything called racism at all, or in general in America. I thought that was just something to talk about in class, and that was it. I thought that when I get here, everybody would just mind their own business and everybody do their own things, just like I used to see in my country, and not judge anyone based on their color or where they're from. But I'm not saying that in my country we don't judge each other, but what we don't do, we don't judge them by where they're from or their skin color or their religion. Anyways, I was proved wrong of what I thought of this country when I became a victim of racism. The days that I was like, I wish I could die. I just didn't see any point of me being alive at that moment at all. Yes, I've had great times when I came here. I enjoyed the weather, its view. I went shopping. I was excited even to be here. And I even saw snow before. I thought it was just a fantasy I used to see on the television, or it's just in the imagination of the people who make movies. When I first saw this kid in middle school, I was in mainstream. She came to me and she said, "Yo, why are you here?" And I told her that I was in mainstream. Mainstream was the kind of level that people who are just English learners was like kind of high level for them to take. So I was really one of the lucky kids that I was there. Then she said to me, "No way, that cannot be. Do you even know English enough to be here?" I didn't reply enough to her questions. Not that I was trying to be rude to her or anything. I was just nervous, and now she was even making me more nervous. And then she called one of her friends. Then she told him, "Yo, guess what? This kid is a mainstream." And then the kid said, "No way, that cannot be. You know, maybe she's having a bad one." You know what I mean? You know, that's kind of days where you have a wrong turn and you go in the wrong class. She stated as I know exactly what he was talking about, but I didn't. Then she walked away and sat across me. I heard them complain, one of them complain, and they said, "You know what? I don't even like her." At that moment, I felt an uncomfortable feeling growing inside me. All I wish was just to get out of that class and never come back again, which I did. I never went back. Whenever I saw those kids in the street or in the hallway in the school, I would just find another way so that I cannot make eye contact with them, or just so that they cannot see me where they were walking. So kept going like that, and then when I got in that school, I was willing to make as many friends as I could, but I couldn't since that happened to me. My limitation of being sociable was really, really low, and I only talked to people that even less than 10, but only because they were from my country and were helping me to get used to the school system and everything, and only because they also didn't have some judgment and assumption towards me. I knew since I was gonna go in high school, all that was gonna get worse, and it did get worse. My entire freshman year, I only had the one friend who also helped me to get more friends. At the end of the school year, I only had 5 friends. In my freshman year, I was bullied. I tried to be kind to people, even put on some fake smiles so that I can fit in, but all I got in return was just hate and insult. There's this kid in my gym. We were just before school, the class started. He was playing basketball, and then the ball came to me, and I picked it up, and I gave it to him, and then he just said, "Yo, stupid, don't touch my ball." And I wondered why he even said that. I was like, what just happened in my mind? But I didn't say anything. And then another day, he was like, "You're a freak, where are you from?" Still, I did not answer the question. But this one girl, she stood up for me. She was like, "Don't you call her stupid or freak. Just ask her name simply and then she will tell you. That's rude." And then I just stood there and appreciated what she just did for me. And at that moment, we became really good friends. And she's the one who helped me build my self-confidence and self-esteem. She was bullied too, but the only difference we had between was that she knew exactly how to stand up against her bullies and have enough self-esteem and confidence, and she was really sociable. And I admired her a lot. She helped me find new friends and I would hang out with them whenever she's not around, and really helped me get where I am right now. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't even be standing right here. I'm kind of kid who just whenever I don't feel comfortable around others, I would just sit in the corner and ignore everything that's happening around me. Then, after we became really good friends, all I had to, before even I'd start to build my self-confidence, I would tell my parents, "Hey Mom, you know what? I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to be in this country." Then she would ask me why. Then I would tell her, the weather is so bad, plus I'm allergic to it. It gets me real sick. And then she would say, "You get over it." But that was just lies to get them off the hook so that they won't ask me about my experience out of our house, because I didn't want to talk about it even a little bit. So that was my story, and now I'm proud to say that despite my experiences, I'm really proud to say that I finally find enough self-confidence and esteem to stand up against any of my bullies, and I desire to see the same to the people I was once like. Thank you.
Ramel, you're going to be next, but first I would ask that folks take a couple of beats to jot down your reactions to Anik's story. Okay. Virtual Leslie out there in video land, you're on deck. You'll know what I meant in just a second. Right now, our next storyteller is Ramel Khalif. Please join me in welcoming him to the stage.
Good evening. Thank you for having me out today. I suppose my story begins 1984, Los Angeles. As you can tell, I tend to have a very mild approach to my speaking style. I'm calm, quiet, reserved, largely. It doesn't come from nowhere. You don't lick it off the rocks like the Irish say. What ended up happening is that I have this sense of myself. I exist as a Middle Eastern man. My name says such, or does it? Ramel. Rommel. My namesake, the Desert Fox. Rommel. German general. I started out my life living in a geographically diverse area in Los Angeles. And what that essentially means is Latino, Black, Asian, little J town, places that really focus entirely on their culture. Right? So you end up in this strange place with these strange people, and I begin to assimilate the linguistic dialect. I'm a linguist, a sociolinguist, as I like to consider myself, and as I consider most English majors. I found myself assimilating the dialect of the language around me, of my peers, my more socialite peers, people who might get out a bit more, have a few more friends. What was really odd is as I began to assimilate the dialect, I noticed a degree of resentment pick up among specifically my African American peers. Now here I was in the middle of this neighborhood full of people who looked different than me, talked different than me. So I began to sound like they do. But hold on a second. They put the brakes on that. And they said, you can't sound like that. It's not okay for you to do that. That's ours. You're assimilating our culture into yours. And I wasn't sure who I was. So I'm like, okay, so I'm a Middle Eastern guy, right? Both my parents are Middle Eastern. And then time passes. And I continue to assimilate these dialects, and they continue to resist. And a common compliment to me was, you speak English good. I know, it's almost like I grew up and was born here. It really was exactly that. I grew up and I was born here, yet I wasn't allowed access to certain parts of your language, and language is what counts to me. So I continued my career and ended up sooner or later in college. As I began to take an interest, amateur interest in genealogies, I noticed that my hair is wavy. Well, my mom's hair is thick and straight. My father's hair is thin and straight. Something's not connecting here. I go to an optometrist to look into my color blindness. Find out I'm 18% blue-green colorblind. My mom isn't colorblind. Neither is my father. Hold on. So, Mom, what's going on? Her response was, why are you asking so many questions? Sooner or later, I found out that my grandmother, turns out she was from Grenada. And I knew her as Auntie the first 22 years of my life. She passed in 94. It's a very sad event for me. But I didn't know she was my grandma at the time. Right? Time passes on. I end up working on English, literature, language. I'm beginning the process of working on my senior thesis. And I'm utilizing a series of Post-its at work, laying them down. I'm approached by a supervisor who is entirely less than happy with me most of the time. The supervisor then asked me, so we've been losing out on Post-its a lot. We were wondering if you were taking any of those home. I said no. She said, are you sure? Well, as I understand the state of being in possession of an object, it's a binary one. So either you have it or you don't. It's kind of like being kind of pregnant. So I'm sure she hated me for the person she knew me to be, right? Which is fine by me. It's okay to go ahead and hate me for that reason, but time passed on. I ended up in an elevator in New England, in Manchester specifically. It was at Fox Hill, Fox Run Hall. I'm in the elevator, and I'm about to go up, when a woman walks into the elevator. She looks over at me, and she says, "Excuse me." Now, we're in a 10 by 10 elevator, and there's nobody else in it. So, okay, you're excused, please, enjoy. She comes in and immediately begins to clutch her purse. Okay. 3 floors later, she tends to slide by as she exits the elevator before I do. Now, there's enough room between us to move a hurdle bicycle, but she turns sideways so that she can scooch out. Well, that's the way it goes, right? It's the aggregate nature of microaggression. And that's the important part to remember, is that aggregate nature. It develops, it builds. As they are microaggressive toward you in one way or another, it socially engineers others to be microaggressive towards you as well. Recently, I had an interaction with somebody at work who looked over at me, middle of the boss office, said, "I went to human resources about you. I think you've been stealing meds. What do you say? You like the gabapentin? Huh? How about the hydrocodone? What about the melatonin?" The melatonin struck an interesting note for me as well. Specifically because it was completely out of place, but I responded all pissfully at the time, like me too. Well, it brings me to the end of it, which is social engineering of microaggression. This person began developing using the aggregate nature of microaggression to go ahead and engineer a target for people. And that's where you end up. I'm othered ambiguously. I'm black, German, Irish, Middle Eastern. I am othered. As I am othered, it drops me in the middle of everything and makes an easy target. Thank you.
You can just jump down some of your thoughts and feelings. While you do that, we'll bring Leslie Yaffa, who is one of our social work faculty who lives in Canada, online. Do we need to dim these lights there?
Are you able to see that okay?
Or should we dim them?
It might be loud, so I'll adjust that.
Hi everyone, my name is Leslie Yaffa. I'm a full-time faculty member at the University of New England MSW program online. And I am sorry I can't be there in person, but my boss, Dr. Danielle Wozniak, hasn't built me a monorail to get there. So I wish you guys a great evening. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my ideas of microaggression and some of my experience as when I was a practitioner, social work practitioner in Toronto, Canada. I always categorize microaggressions in a verbal sense, in a behavioral sense, and environmental sense. So the little nuances that I experienced over the years as a white woman, as well as someone who worked with other people, particularly in the minority communities here in Toronto. Things like verbal things that would come up would be, "You weren't born here." Kind of little mini microaggressions to young ladies I would deal with. Other behavioral stuff was, "I'm not racist because I have a black friend." So those are the mini ones. The environmental piece, I think, was cultural nuances. So the pathology of culture or age, of gender. So the one I can remember just briefly was issues around communication style. People would believe that you should talk British English here, as opposed to the patois that I was experiencing when I was working with the West Indian communities. So in a larger context, I think I want to tell the story about my experience as a white woman being pulled over with black kids in my car. So I'll give you the background a little bit. my job at the time, this was probably in 1998, my job at the time was working with young women in a young women's group, and all of them were minority or racialized young women, and we would go get together every week. Probably it was a Friday night, and these young women wanted somewhere to go, so we'd often just gather, almost just to gather, but also to learn something. So I would put together a curriculum, and we watch DVDs, we talk about sex, we talk about life skills, and food always was in the mix, and we always learned something. And in the end of the evening, we cleaned up and we would leave the community center. And I often would bring many of them home. And I had a Jeep, and it was one of those old Suzuki Jeeps where you manually would have to take off the top of the vehicle. So we went in, we got in the car, there was 4 of us, of various ages of young women. There was myself, and I was a younger social worker at the time. There was myself, there was probably 2 15-year-olds and a 12-year-old and a 17-year-old. And we all fit into my little Jeep. And we were driving along, and it got very hot in my Jeep. And so I said, let's pull over, take off the top, because we had to manually take it off, and we'll proceed. And they said, okay, great. So stopped, started to take off the top of the vehicle, and pulling up behind us was the police department. Coming right up to me, not addressing the young women, and asking them if there was something wrong with me. And I kind of gazed over at him, and I gazed over at the girls, and I could see that they were getting very, very antsy to why he's just asking me. And I said, no sir, there was nothing wrong, we were just taking off the top. And he kind of gazed back at the girls in a kind of passive-aggressive way, saying, you sure there's nothing wrong? And I'm saying, you sure there's nothing wrong? And he kind of he left, and we had to kind of go through that, me and the girls, very slowly, and understand why he would pull up behind our vehicle and ask him those questions. And the girls knew, even though they're 12, they still know that passive-aggressive microaggression for them being racialized young females. And they understood the concepts of you got to close your mouth when the police come, which is really sad, isn't it? That young women who are doing absolutely nothing wrong have to understand the concept of when the police pull up to you, say nothing, do nothing, and don't defend yourself. So I went through it with them, and they understand that they are microaggressions, that there's different standards for white people that there is for racialized minorities, particularly in larger cities. So in many ways, the cop made the assumption that I was being harassed by these young women, or these young women were somehow came up to my vehicle and were kind of attacking me, which they weren't. Again, we explained to the police officer that we were taking off the top because we were hot. And he looked baffled, and I was wondering why he would look baffled, because for me, we were just doing a normal occurrence on a summer night. So that's kind of my story about microaggressions. So I wish you guys a good storytelling. See you later.
As you do, the closer, Natasha.
The closer.
Closer.
The closer.
Please welcome Natasha Wilson to the stage.
I'm not going to throw up. My children are in the audience. I will never live it down if I do. I am the closer, right? I come home like, pick up, time to go to bed, turn off cell. I'm the closer. Anyways, all right. So, my story. I mean, I'm a human being that looks like this, with brown skin, kinky hair. I have tons of stories, right? So, which story to tell? So I'm in Maine. I'm from New Orleans, which our mayor after Hurricane Katrina called the Chocolate City, right? So, because most people look like me, actually 75% of the population before the storm looked like me, or some version of me. I'm in Maine, and people don't look like me. But this isn't my first time at the white people rodeo, right? I got my first graduate degree in anthropology from the University of Iowa, so I know something about being around lots of white people. And I've handled it pretty well most of my life. So when I came to the University of New England, I was actually excited. I was getting another advanced degree. I wasn't quite finished my PhD, but I was gonna still start another MSW. And I went to my human behavior in the social environment class in my second semester. So this was in the spring of 2013, is that right? I graduated in 2015, that has to be right. And I'm sitting in class, and there are these students, these two students, they're having this conversation. Someone's getting ready to go visit someplace in California, and the other student says to her, "Don't go to that neighborhood, it's so ghetto." So, in that moment, I'm sitting in class, I'm already having this experience where no one really talks to me. I always kind of sit by myself. And I'm a super social person, so, I was like, what would attachment theory say that I'm not making friends? Is this an attachment style? So I'm questioning myself, right? This is what social work has you do. But something happened that day. And so I never went back to class that semester. I never went back to class. And it took me several months to figure out what was going on with me. So in 2012, I was finishing up my doctoral dissertation research in Boston, and I got a call saying that my two younger brothers had been shot and they were dead. So, you deal with that. That's a lot. I thought I was handling it well, right? I sort of couldn't keep writing, but I just kept going. I moved to Maine. My sweet, wonderful partner who was already living here just thought this would be a great place to sort of get a fresh start and have a fresh experience because this place is absolutely beautiful, right? So I move here. No one talks to me. I'm living on the hill. A couple months later, someone burns our apartment down. And my cat, my last little piece of New Orleans, died in the fire. All the animals that lived in our building died that day. So I start school at UNE just a few months after the fire. Normally, like I said, I'm pretty resilient, right? I can take a lot. I've microaggressions, that happens all the time. I'm good, I can handle this stuff. But something happened that day in class. Something clicked, something changed. I wasn't as resilient as I was. I just come through two major traumas, and so all my resiliency reserves were depleted. So all the little microaggressions I heard in the fall semester, oh, you're pretty for a black girl. No one ever said that here. I got that in Iowa. But can I touch your hair? Or all those things that just kind of make you feel like, or you just know you don't fit in the space that you're in. I couldn't externalize them anymore. I was in my field placement in Lewiston, not knowing the full history of the immigrant experience in Lewiston, at least the New Mainer experience. And I was at the gas station on my way to my field placement, car parked the wrong direction, and someone just drove out of the gas station and told me, I'm not gonna say because my kids are here, but called me the N-word and told me to go back to Africa. And I had to go to my field placement and try to help people work through trauma, right? And I'm sitting here having all these traumatic experiences one after the other, and never, ever did I think that microaggressions could contribute to trauma. Never. So I can't go back to class. I attempt to go back to class that fall. I call my professor and I'm like, I can't breathe. I'm crying. I can't come to class and I do not know why. My partner does not know how to support me. It's really hard for him to see this happening because he doesn't really know what's going on. No one hit me, nothing
you know? But it was all these microaggressions constantly that I just didn't have the reserves for anymore. So every story, right, we're supposed to have this beginning, this middle, this ending. I don't know what the end is, because now my dissertation research has really shifted to look at racism and trauma and to really look at the impact of whiteness. And I'm like, well, you know, I am a pretty spiritual person, so maybe I'm here in the whitest state in the country because this is the only place I could fully understand the impact of racism. I could fully understand the impact of unexamined white privilege. Because I gotta have a silver lining, right? I have to. Not only that, I go through tons and tons of therapy over summer, and I come back to school, and I'm sort of feeling back to myself again. I go to faculty here at UNE that have been really supportive, and I put together a microaggression committee. And here we are, because I just decided I'm not gonna go crazy by myself. If I'm going crazy, everybody getting on this train. That's my story.
So my vocabulary is hands now. Maine, vacation land, the way life should be, white people's rodeo. Thank you so much. Seriously, another round of applause for Natasha. So I'll just take a few seconds to jot your thoughts down, and we'll open it up for more general discussion.
Would you like the lights on or low? On? Would you do that? Great. Thoughts, reactions, comments?
As you warm up, I haven't told a story, so I'm going to jump in, because as I think about Maine, Natasha's story reminds me of Maine. I recall being at the beach here in Maine one day, and a white mother and her approximately 3-year-old white daughter walked by past me, and they were almost out of earshot. And the little girl, with palpable concern in her voice, looked up to her mother and said, "Mommy, that man stayed in the sun way too long." It was a reminder that sometimes you don't really feel like you fit here as a person of color all the time. But comments, reactions to the stories.
I just have, just for all the storytellers tonight, I was just really reminded of, I'm sure a lot of you have seen the Brene Brown video, and I just want to sort of call in that voice who talks about vulnerability and talks about how much courage it takes. And I just really want to thank like every single one of our storytellers for bringing that into the room tonight, but also like just enabling all of us to be able to learn, because I think that's one of the biggest pieces that I'll take away from this evening is how much we all have to learn so that we aren't causing harm to ourselves and others on a just really regular basis. So I just want to thank all of you for sharing.
Thank you.
Those of you who are in my human behavior and the social environment class, will you remind me to show you the Brene Brown video on vulnerability, please, this week?
Other comments? Other reactions? Man, take it back.
It's interesting that this term microaggression is really what I perceive as being a lack of civility. And usually, being raised in the 50s and the first black child in an all-white school back in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I had to learn very early how to conduct myself. And as my parents wanted me to do, is to acclimate. And that was one of the things that drove the civil rights movement in the 50s and the 60s, that black people were entitled to the same rights as white people. But remember, you have to kind of act white. So I deal with the incivility with humor. I get on an elevator and a child turns to their mother and goes, "Look, Mommy, the N-word." And I turn around and go, "Where? And the child is confused. My children are biracial and have light eyes, blue eyes, and people would come up and say, "Oh, are those your children?" And I go, "No, I'm the nanny." So sometimes it's just humor, because you laugh through the hurt and you laugh through the awkwardness, and sometimes that's the only thing that you can do.
To our right or left in the audience?
I just want to say I was sitting here thinking, like rodeo, and oh my God, this does not apply to me because I am so super nice and I would never do anything like this. But I think one of the things that I've learned is a lot of these behaviors are socially taught and unintentional. You know, a child in an elevator, and I think it's just going to make me a little more conscious of my own behavior. I would have said that I would never have done anything like that I would never allow that to happen, like on my watch. But I can't sit here and look back and promise you that that's true, because I really had no idea until I was looking at it. So thank you for helping me to look at it.
Thank you. So one theme that I see cutting across a number of comments both now and just before the intermission are things that people are feeling that they've learned from hearing the stories. I wonder if others have any thoughts on what, if anything, you've learned from hearing these stories.
One of the things that struck me, not in every story, but in so many of the stories, was the theme of shame and how much that emotion divides us and separates us from each other. So just that was one thing that really struck me. Yeah, and just to have the consciousness that we're acting from a place of shame if we're the person who's being bullied, or how that disempowers us.
Thank you.
One of the things that really strikes me is the importance of sort of having tools to say things or combat things in the moment, because I know that somebody mentioned, you go away and you think about it and say, oh, I should have said that, or I really wish I had said that. But to really try to have some things just in your toolbox that are ready to go. I think ouch is a terrific one. I've heard that before. And that just really levels the playing fields to say, let's talk about what's happening right now. Another one is sometimes just really naming it for yourself. I've said this makes me feel really uncomfortable, but just trying to come up with a couple of statements that you just have at the ready to bring up, so that you're not sort of caught thinking, oh, I wish I had said something.
And that also speaks to the fact that we must always be aware, right? That we always have to be aware and ready. The other thing is that I wonder if there's any thoughts about transformation. That part of that awareness for tonight, part of our stories, is about transforming ourselves through that awareness. Does anyone have a comment about that?
I guess it's sort of about that, but I wanted to appreciate this gentleman's his story, and kind of relating to what you just said about kind of realizing things and opening your eyes. I think it would be a great part 2 for this if we talked about microaggressions, like things as white people we have done to someone else. I think that would be a very eye-opening experience for a lot of people. Just start transformation?
Sure. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I went to dinner at the Whole Foods parking lot. I was sitting in the car eating my stuff. And I was driving out to come here, and I saw a Muslim woman dressed in her hijab. And I thought, oh yeah, I felt it come up. I felt my own wanting to avoid. And instead I turned and I smiled at her. And she was like, there was a look of shock. And then she smiled back. And without any words exchanged between us, we had an exchange. We shared energy. And to me, that this program is teaching me not to be afraid and to acknowledge that we're all human beings. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. All right. I think that maybe that's a wrap. Oh, I beg your pardon. I thought it was a wrap.
I'm the closer, remember?
You are the closer.
I was just thinking about the role of humor, and I don't know how funny this is or not, but I know, like, as I was unraveling last semester, you know, I started doing a lot of spiritual work, and I reached out to one of my friends, who's also a colleague and anthropologist, and she reminded me of part of why I wanted to be an anthropologist, because they focus so much on the constructed nature of race, right? It's a social construct that we breathe life into. And she said, and I feel like I need to qualify that she's a white woman, and she says, you know what? Let's get some t-shirts made that said, we're all from Africa. And I was like, you know what, maybe. Because that's the thing. When you share a glance with a person, when you pause, you have an opportunity to remember common humanity. We all come from the same place. I'm not trying to have a kumbaya moment, I'm just saying that's the real truth.
I would just say as my parting word, let's keep telling stories.
Absolutely. And keep sharing, and thank you so much for risking the vulnerability to come here tonight, to listen, to tell, and to be a part of a community that's caring, concerned, and moving us on. Thank you.
Thanks.